The lights were bright, the cameras were live, and everyone in the studio was waiting for one thing: a reaction. When Muhammad Ali sat down for the interview, the host thought he knew exactly how it would go. Sharp questions, rising tension, a headline moment. But something unexpected happened. Ali didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he stayed calm. And in that silence, the atmosphere of the entire room began to change. What started as an attempt to provoke a champion became a lesson in dignity that no one watching would forget. The studio lights felt warmer than usual when Muhammad Ali stepped onto the set. The audience clapped with excitement, expecting humor, confidence, and the familiar charm that had defined so many of his appearances. From the outside, everything looked routine. Cameras moved into position, microphones adjusted quietly, and the host greeted him with a polished smile. Yet beneath that polished surface, something felt slightly off. The atmosphere carried a subtle tension that most viewers could not yet recognize. Ali took his seat calmly, scanning the room with the awareness of someone who had spent years reading people before they spoke. The host's posture was relaxed, but his eyes held a sharper focus than usual. It wasn't the energy of admiration. It was closer to examination. Ali sensed that the conversation might not follow the usual rhythm. Instead of leaning into performance, he settled into stillness, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. The first questions were predictable, about training, fame, and the public image that followed him everywhere. Ali answered with patience, his voice steady and controlled. The audience laughed lightly at a few remarks, but the laughter felt thinner than usual. There was an undercurrent building slowly, something unspoken. Ali noticed it without reacting, choosing to remain present rather than anticipatory. As the interview progressed, the host's tone began to shift. Questions became less curious and more pointed, phrased in ways that invited disagreement rather than reflection. Ali listened carefully, recognizing the subtle change in intention. He did not rush to fill the silence after each question. Instead, he let pauses stretch just long enough to acknowledge the weight behind the words. The audience began to sense the difference as well. Their reactions grew quieter, their attention sharper. They had come expecting entertainment, but what they were witnessing felt more complex. The host leaned forward slightly, pressing into topics that felt personal rather than professional. Ali's expression remained calm, but his eyes reflected awareness rather than amusement. Inside the studio, the air felt heavier with each exchange. Lights that once seemed bright now felt intense, almost exposing. Ali adjusted his posture gently, signaling composure rather than defensiveness. He understood that the interview had shifted into unfamiliar territory, but he chose to respond with patience instead of resistance. The host continued, framing questions in ways that hinted at challenge. There was an expectation that Ali would respond with his famous quick wit or fiery confidence. The audience waited for that moment, anticipating a spark that would ignite the room. Instead, Ali answered slowly, choosing clarity over speed. His calmness disrupted the rhythm the host seemed to expect. Each answer Ali gave felt deliberate, as if he was weighing not only the words themselves but the atmosphere they would create. He knew that tone can shape perception more than content alone, rather than matching the host's intensity. He softened his delivery. That choice began to change how the room felt, even if only slightly. The cameras captured every subtle shift, the narrowing of the host's eyes, the stillness of Ali's hands, the audience leaning forward in quiet anticipation. No one said it aloud, but everyone sensed that this interview was becoming something different. It was no longer just conversation. It was a test of composure. Ali noticed how silence began to influence the space. Moments without immediate response forced the host to reconsider his pacing. The tension did not explode. It lingered quietly, reshaping the energy of the room. Ali understood that sometimes the most powerful response is not an argument, but the refusal to be rushed. The audience's reactions changed as well. Instead of laughter, there were thoughtful murmurs. Instead of applause, there was attentive quiet. Ali's presence shifted from entertainer to observer, and that shift created a subtle but undeniable change in the atmosphere. The host pressed forward, perhaps expecting Ali to break the calm with a sharp reply. Yet Ali remained steady, answering questions without hostility. His restraint made the pointed tone of the questions feel heavier, as if the imbalance itself revealed more than any confrontation could. Ali's breathing remained slow and controlled, a habit formed through years of discipline. He focused not on winning the exchange, but on maintaining dignity. Each answer felt like a step away from conflict rather than toward it. The audience could feel the difference even if they couldn't fully explain it. The interview began to feel less like a performance and more like a moment of reflection. Ali's calm responses created space where tension might have otherwise escalated. That space invited viewers to listen more closely, to observe rather than react. Behind the cameras, producers watched carefully, sensing the shift but unsure how to steer it back toward entertainment. The room no longer felt like a typical talk show set. It felt quieter, more serious, as if something meaningful was unfolding beneath the surface. Ali noticed the host's subtle frustration when attempts to provoke failed to spark the reaction he seemed to expect. Yet Ali did not show satisfaction or resistance. He simply continued speaking with measured calm, allowing the conversation to evolve naturally. The lights overhead reflected softly in Ali's eyes, emphasizing the steadiness of his gaze. He was fully present, neither defensive nor confrontational. That balance created an atmosphere that felt unexpectedly grounded. Viewers watching live began to sense that this interview would be remembered for reasons beyond entertainment. As the conversation moved forward, the contrast between expectation and reality became more visible. The audience had anticipated energy and conflict, but instead they witnessed composure and restraint. That contrast created curiosity, drawing people deeper into the moment. Ali's voice remained even, his tone thoughtful. He did not attempt to dominate the conversation or redirect it aggressively. Instead, he allowed the host's questions to exist while choosing how to respond with intention. This approach quietly reshaped the dynamics of the exchange. The studio felt smaller now, as if the tension had narrowed the space around them. Every movement carried meaning. Every pause felt significant. Ali's calm presence began to influence not only the host, but the audience as well. By the end of this early phase of the interview, it was clear that something unusual was happening. What began as a typical television appearance had transformed into a deeper moment of observation and self-control. The interview felt different, not because of conflict, but because of how calmly Ali navigated it. And in that difference, the stage was set for a moment that no one watching could have predicted. A moment where dignity would speak louder than reaction, and where silence would begin to change the atmosphere of the entire room. The tone of the interview shifted more noticeably as the host began leaning into sharper questions. What once felt like casual conversation started to carry an edge, as if each sentence was crafted to pull Muhammad Ali toward confrontation. The audience sensed it before they fully understood it. There was a pause between words that felt heavier than silence. It was the kind of tension that builds slowly, almost politely, before anyone realizes it has taken control of the room. The host's voice remained smooth, but the phrasing changed. Compliments turned into challenges, disguised as curiosity. Ali listened carefully, his posture relaxed yet attentive. He didn't interrupt or rush to defend himself. Instead, he allowed each question to land fully before responding, a choice that subtly disrupted the rhythm the host seemed to expect. Viewers anticipated a fiery comeback, something sharp and memorable. Ali had built a reputation on bold responses and quick wit, but this time he chose patience over performance. His calm presence made the host's attempts to provoke feel increasingly obvious, even without confrontation. The room began to shift in energy, though no one openly acknowledged it yet. The host leaned forward, pressing into topics that felt personal rather than professional. The words carried a tone meant to unsettle. Ali noticed it instantly, yet his face showed no irritation, only quiet focus. By refusing to react impulsively, he turned the spotlight back onto the questions themselves rather than the emotion behind them. Each pause between exchanges grew longer. The audience leaned in, unsure of what would come next. Instead of escalating tension, Ali's silence softened it. The host filled the gaps with more pointed remarks, as if trying to draw a reaction that refused to appear. That absence of anger became the most powerful presence in the room. Ali answered slowly, choosing language that avoided conflict without surrendering dignity. He didn't dismiss the host's tone, but he didn't mirror it either. This difference created a contrast that viewers could feel, the sharper the questions became. the calmer Ali's responses sounded. The studio lights seemed harsher as the atmosphere thickened. Camera angles tightened, capturing every subtle expression. The host's attempts to provoke were becoming clearer, but Ali treated each moment as an opportunity to demonstrate composure. His voice remained steady, neither defensive nor confrontational. The audience's reactions changed gradually. Laughter faded, replaced by attentive silence. People began to realize they were witnessing more than an interview. It felt like a lesson unfolding in real time. Ali's restraint began to shape the emotional tone of the room, drawing focus away from the host's provocation. The host tried humor next, perhaps hoping to break Ali's calm. The jokes carried an edge that hinted at mockery rather than playfulness. Ali acknowledged them with a gentle smile, but he did not engage in the same energy. His refusal to escalate created an imbalance that made the attempts feel smaller than intended. Ali's breathing remained slow and measured. Years of discipline allowed him to stay grounded, even when conversation turned uncomfortable. He understood that reacting emotionally would shift attention away from meaning and towards spectacle. Instead, he chose clarity, allowing his words to land without force. The tension in the room began to feel visible, almost tangible. Producers behind the cameras exchanged glances, aware that the interview was moving away from its original tone. Yet, Ali's composure prevented the moment from collapsing into chaos. He held the space calmly, allowing the conversation to continue without aggression. The host's persistence revealed more about intention than content. Each attempt to provoke seemed to fade against Ali's steady presence. Viewers watching at home could sense the difference. The interview no longer felt like entertainment. It felt like a test of character. Ali noticed how silence began to work in his favor. By not reacting immediately, he allowed the audience to absorb the weight of each question. The pauses gave people time to reflect, shifting sympathy naturally without confrontation. It was a subtle but powerful form of influence. Even the audience's body language changed. People leaned forward, listening closely, rather than waiting for laughter. Ali's calm answers encouraged deeper attention. The host's sharper tone began to feel isolated, almost out of place against the quiet strength Ali displayed. Ali chose words that emphasized understanding rather than defense. He acknowledged differences without framing them as battles to be won. This approach slowly redirected the conversation's energy, making the host's attempts to provoke seem less effective with each exchange. The studio felt quieter despite the presence of cameras and lights. The absence of conflict created a new kind of intensity. Ali's responses carried a sense of maturity that contrasted sharply with the host's increasingly pointed questions. That contrast became the unspoken focus of the moment. The host seemed surprised by the lack of reaction. Each new question pushed slightly harder, searching for an emotional crack that never appeared. Ali maintained eye contact, offering calm answers that revealed thoughtfulness rather than irritation. His restraint began to shape the narrative of the interview itself. Ali understood that composure is not passive. It requires intention, patience, and awareness. He treated every question as an opportunity to demonstrate dignity rather than dominance. That choice changed how viewers perceived the entire exchange. As the interview continued, tension transformed into curiosity. The audience wanted to see how far the host would go and how Ali would respond without losing calm. The conversation became less about the questions themselves and more about the example Ali was setting through his behavior. Ali's presence turned what could have been a heated confrontation into a quiet lesson. By refusing to mirror negativity, he shifted the emotional balance of the room. The atmosphere no longer belonged to the person asking the questions, it belonged to the calmness of the man answering them. And as the host prepared to push even further, it became clear that the real story was no longer about provocation. It was about how composure can change a space without raising a voice. The interview had entered a new phase, one where dignity began to reshape everything unfolding on live television. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted noticeably by the time Muhammad Ali began answering more deeply. The host's attempts to provoke had not disappeared, but they were losing momentum. Ali's calm presence created a quiet contrast that drew the audience's attention away from confrontation and toward reflection. What could have become an argument was slowly transforming into something more meaningful. Ali spoke slowly, allowing each word to settle before moving forward. He didn't rush to correct the host or defend himself aggressively. Instead, he reframed questions in ways that emphasized understanding rather than conflict. This approach surprised viewers who expected sharp humor or fiery rebuttals. His voice carried steadiness, and that steadiness began to influence the entire room. The audience leaned closer, sensing that something different was happening. Silence filled the spaces where laughter once lived. Ali's responses did not escalate tension. They softened it. Even the host seemed momentarily unsure of how to proceed when faced with answers that refused to mirror aggression. Ali's calmness wasn't accidental. It came from years of experience learning when to speak and when to hold back. He knew that reacting emotionally would shift focus away from the message he wanted to convey. By remaining composed, he allowed his ideas to stand without distraction. The host continued pressing, asking questions designed to challenge Ali's character rather than his career. The tone carried an expectation of defensiveness. Yet Ali maintained eye contact and answered with clarity. He acknowledged differences of opinion without turning them into personal battles. Viewers watching live began to notice how the room felt quieter than before. The tension that once seemed sharp was becoming reflective. Ali's restraint gave the audience permission to listen more carefully. Instead of waiting for a dramatic moment, they began to absorb the conversation's deeper meaning. Ali's words carried a gentle firmness. He did not avoid difficult topics, but he addressed them without hostility. This balance demonstrated a different kind of strength, one rooted in control rather than confrontation. The host's attempts to provoke began to feel less effective, not because they stopped, but because Ali refused to amplify them. The cameras captured subtle changes in the host's posture. Leaning forward with intensity earlier, he now hesitated slightly before each question. Ali's calm responses had altered the rhythm of the interview. The power dynamic was shifting quietly, without a single raised voice. Ali used pauses intentionally, allowing silence to speak alongside his words. Those pauses created space for reflection, making the audience consider not just what was being said, but how it was being said. Silence became part of his message, emphasizing composure over reaction. The host tried humor again, perhaps hoping to lighten the atmosphere or regain control of the narrative. Ali responded with a soft smile, acknowledging the moment without fully engaging in it. His restraint made the humor feel less like entertainment and more like an attempt to redirect tension. As the conversation deepened, Ali spoke about dignity in ways that felt personal rather than rehearsed. He emphasized that respect begins with how you respond under pressure. These words resonated with viewers because they were demonstrated in real time, not delivered as abstract advice. The audience's attention shifted fully toward Ali. They were no longer waiting for conflict. They were witnessing composure. Even those who had come expecting entertainment felt drawn into the calmness he created. The atmosphere grew quieter, more thoughtful. Ali's presence seemed to slow the pace of the entire studio. The host's questions became shorter, less sharp, as if adapting to the new tone. Ali's steady responses encouraged a more respectful exchange, even when disagreement remained. Behind the scenes, producers watched carefully as the interview transformed into something unexpected. What began as tension was evolving into a moment of reflection. Ali's calmness turned the spotlight away from confrontation and toward character. The audience noticed how Ali never interrupted, even when questions felt unfair. That patience communicated confidence more powerfully than any quick comeback could have. It showed that strength does not always need to prove itself loudly. Ali's words began to feel less like answers and more like lessons. He spoke about understanding, respect, and the importance of controlling one's response. The audience responded not with applause, but with attentive silence, a sign that the message was landing deeply. The host's tone softened slightly, perhaps influenced by the atmosphere Ali had created. Questions shifted toward curiosity, rather than provocation. The energy in the room felt lighter, as if tension had been replaced by mutual awareness. Ali remained grounded throughout, never appearing victorious or defensive. His calmness was not about winning the conversation, it was about preserving dignity. That intention shaped every word he spoke and every pause he allowed. The studio lights seemed less harsh now, reflecting a calmer mood across the audience. What began as an attempt to provoke had turned into an opportunity for reflection. Ali's composure had transformed the interview into something no one expected. As the segment moved forward, it became clear that Ali's greatest strength in this moment was not his voice, but his restraint. He demonstrated that calmness can disarm tension more effectively than confrontation ever could. And in that quiet shift, the atmosphere of the entire room changed. The host no longer controlled the emotional tone of the interview. Ali's composure had become the guiding force, proving that sometimes the most powerful response is simply staying calm when the world expects you to react.